We'll get into some of the big moments in the game as we go along. Let's bring Alex Kirkland in to get the Madrid perspective on this one. Alex, great to have you with us. Tell us what went wrong for Real Madrid in this tie overall.
It was incredibly one-sided tonight, wasn't it? And I agree that I don't think Madrid were a whole lot better in the first leg either, and were a little bit fortunate to come away with a 1-1 draw. I have seen some people saying tonight, "Oh, I've never seen Real Madrid's kind of dominated like this," and I agree. I don't think that's entirely true. I think people have forgotten a little bit actually how Real Madrid won the Champions League last season. And they didn't win it by dominating games. In fact, they rarely dominated any of those knockout stage games last season. What we saw last season was them able, through their key players, kind of stepping up in key moments and hitting teams at just the right time. And they kept doing it again and again and again. And they weren't able to do that against this Manchester City team. I think even with City's dominance tonight, if somehow, thanks to Courtois, if it had been 1-0 after 70 minutes or 75 minutes, then maybe you think they might have been able to do something similar to what they did last year. But it wasn't, of course. It was 2-0 at that stage. And very shortly afterwards, it was 3-0 and then 4-0. There will be, as there always is, a pretty frenzied reaction to this here in Madrid. So I think there'll be question marks about some of the key players who haven't performed. There'll be question marks about Karim Benzema, about his future, about whether last season was sort of a last hurrah for him, about other players who haven't really performed in recent months, like Fede Valverde as well. And there'll be questions about Carlo Ancelotti, because there are always questions about a Real Madrid coach when they finish a season without the Champions League and without La Liga. So yeah, all of that analysis is set to come here.
It's almost a silly question from me, because obviously I used to work for Real Madrid, so I kind of know the answer to this, in that the question's been, and there's been debates as to whether going out to this Manchester City side in a semi-final shouldn't look so bad on any coach in world football right now. How much will that be taken into account when it comes to this side and Carlo Ancelotti and what the fans think of a team that they always expect to win, Alex?
I think the difference is the way it happened tonight. I think the fact that you've got a 4-0 scoreline on the night, the fact that Manchester City was so utterly dominant, the fact that, for a lot of the game, especially in the first half, Madrid could barely string 3 or 4 passes together. They couldn't get hold of the ball. They couldn't keep the ball. They had 1 or 2 chances over the course of the game, and you had that shot from distance from Toni Kroos and 1 or 2 moments in the second half. But the fact that they were just completely played off the park, because I think that makes the difference, because this felt like, maybe humiliation is too strong a word, but I don't think it's a million miles from that in terms of the performance levels of the two teams tonight. And that really isn't acceptable. And like I say, the way, like what happened last season, the way they did it last season did mask, I think, a number of performances that overall weren't all that. It just happened that they managed to get the job done in the end, and that hasn't happened now. And like I say, the way it happened tonight, it's not good.
Yeah, I think most about Madrid tonight, Janusz.
I think that they in the tunnel, they came out to play for penalties. This is Real Madrid. You cannot come and say, well, this is Manchester City, and not even try to play. Now, we can make the case that Manchester City didn't allow them to play, but you still have some pretty good players who have the leadership. Look, we've been talking about this all this time. Oh, no, it's Real Madrid. They're going to come back. So we can't switch off now and say, oh, my goodness, what happened to Real Madrid? Because, again, and there's very few times where I will say that, you could see that, and you should see the decline from last year, because nobody's going to tell me, although some tried, that they took Champions League as a priority. You don't lose to this Barcelona team by 14 points at the moment. Barcelona team that couldn't register players, just reminding everybody that we didn't know what they were going to do. Xavi, an inexperienced coach coming in, Lewandowski, last moment players not even being registered and all of that. And here is Barcelona running away with things. And not to mention a struggle against Osasuna in the King's Cup. And okay, they went and won the World Club trophy, so fair play. Although I think we can agree that we treat that kind of, I don't know if it's secondary, but maybe not the most important. So I think the signs were there to see. There was a reason why the likes of Kroos and Modric had to be rested today. You could see it. First goal, right, between Toni Kroos. He left De Bruyne with so much room, and I give him credit for that, because he hesitated there for a second because he was waiting for Kroos to close that hole on Bernardo Silva. Didn't happen, so both looked bad. But this is, again, I mean, for all of us that watch those games week in and week out, it shouldn't be a surprise. It's just that Real Madrid has won it 14 times. They find ways. They have the experience. So we're sort of, as I said, as pundits, are afraid to emphatically say no chance. We were hinting at that, but all I'm saying is this should not be a surprise.
I've just seen some of the post-match reaction here. Danny Carvajal saying afterwards, we played a rival who were much better than us in this match. They pretty well overwhelmed us. That's coming from Danny Carvajal himself. Let's pick out some of the Madrid players then that we probably would have expected more from, Alex. Benzema's just not looking 100%, is he?
That's been the case pretty much all season. You know, he's had these injury problems right the way through the season. He had that huge disappointment of missing the World Cup. He hasn't ever quite been right. There have been games where you think maybe he's getting there, but he hasn't put a run together, certainly not the kind of run that we saw from him last season. Now, I mean, what he did in the Champions League last season, scoring 15 goals and so many of them coming in the knockout stages, was maybe it was a peak for him, and it would be unreasonable maybe to expect him to do that again at the age of 35, but he hasn't had a great season. It was difficult for him tonight, of course, because Madrid just didn't have enough of the ball to really kind of make the most of him. But even so, there have been quite a few games this season where he's looked just a little bit off the pace, a little bit clunky, not quite as smooth as we've tended to see Benzema being. Yeah, he's still scored decent numbers of goals, both in La Liga and in the Champions League as well, but not at the same consistent level as last season. And he is the main man for Real Madrid in so many ways. He's one of the leaders of the team, even though we've seen players like Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo stepping up this season. It's still Benzema who really knits everything together and makes them tick. And that hasn't been the case this season, because either he hasn't always been available, and when he has been available, he hasn't quite been right.
And one of the main men, obviously, for Real Madrid, which obviously says a lot too with what's going on with them lately, has been, as you guys have mentioned, Thibaut Courtois. There was so much talk, Janusz, about where the key battles were going to be. I think we all forgot Haaland against Courtois, and that ended up being such a big part of this game tonight.
It was, and I don't want to shy away from that, because I think the end result was always going to be that way. It was great, but I think key battle was in the differences here, because, you know, I mean, we need to make this about Manchester City more than about Real Madrid. I know Alex is here, so it's good because he's an expert on that. But for me, key decisions is reactions of players, right? Because think about it, Bernardo Silva had by his standard, poor game. We expected him to look like he did against Bayern Munich, especially away. In the first game, remember that one goal, the first one, he got lost there. But look at the difference today. Camavinga not existent, and maybe, I don't remember, but Camavinga perhaps was man of the match, right? So that's one. Remember how Carvajal, how well he played against Grealish? Grealish was very tentative in terms of taking him on. Today, I don't know if Carvajal still knows where he is exactly, because I think he's going to recover from this game for 2 or 3 days. I mean, Grealish was just going at him time and time and time again, right? So you look at these players, and you look at Haaland, who, by the way, it depends how you look at it. I'm sure you get to it, Kay. Missed a couple of great chances, but his presence was felt there, that's for sure. And I thought he was better. So those are the differences. The players that just maybe disappointed a little bit in a draw at the Bernabeu today up their game, because I don't want to talk about the likes of Rodri, because he's in a class of his own in both games. And so I just think there are advantage everywhere. The only two players that I can speak about Real Madrid that played at some level, obviously Courtois and Rodrigo, who for me was probably the best of the lot, because maybe he was the busiest. He was fighting. He was trying to win every ball. He was taking on 2 or 3 players sometimes, even when there was a lost cause. Everything else, I mean, absolutely non-existent. There's no reason almost to dissect that, because this was, a difference of epic proportion. If you really watch both games, I think everybody understands that.
So just before we do bring Mark Ogden in, and obviously there'll be a lot more of a heavy focus on Man City at that point, picking up on what Janusz said there, Alex, which Madrid players did stand out in having a better game than others, shall we say, on the night?
Yeah, of course it has to be Courtois. I mean, we've seen this a lot from Courtois in the Champions League, getting Real Madrid out of trouble. Think back to last season. Think back to, I think it was the first leg against PSG last season. Courtois made 8 saves. In the Champions League final last season against Liverpool, I think Courtois made the most saves that a keeper had made in a Champions League final. So he wasn't even at that level tonight, really, but still very, very good. Otherwise, I agree, it's hard to pick out anybody. Carlo Ancelotti made some big calls dropping Antonio Rudiger after he was so good against Haaland in the first leg, bringing in Militao. I think Militao did okay, but wasn't particularly great. Luka Modric struggled. Of course, he's not 100% fit. He miraculously recovered from injury to feature in the Copa del Rey final and the first leg and now the second leg, but he couldn't last the 90 minutes and had to come off. And it was quiet for Vinicius Jr. as well, who just didn't really get enough of the ball and didn't get enough space or get the ball in the kind of positions that he likes to make things happen.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.